So hello and welcome to another episode of PodcastDX, the show that brings you interviews with people just like you, whose lives were forever changed by a medical diagnosis. I'm Lita.
And I'm Ron.
And I'm Jean Marie.
Collectively, we're the hosts of PodcastDX. Our guest today is Matt. Is it Gutting or Gooding? Gutting. Okay, Matt Gutting. Matt is a preschool teacher turned computer programmer and disability advocate, and will be talking with us today about epilepsy. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Matt.
Hello. How are you guys?
We're doing pretty well for this early morning hour.
Hi, Matt. This is Ron. Thank you for taking the time to sit down and join with us today. Let's start out. Can you tell our listeners, what exactly is epilepsy?
Okay, so epilepsy, at its root, is the tendency to have seizures. Now, a seizure is an episode of just hyperactive electrical activity in the brain that can alter your state of consciousness or your motor activities. It can originate anywhere in the brain and do different things depending on where it originates. So epilepsy can take a number of different forms. It can look like a number of different things, but that's what it is at heart. It's just the tendency to have these seizures for often no apparent reason.
Okay, yeah, that makes it that makes a lot of sense. It's a very clear explanation of what it is. And I'm curious, when were you first diagnosed with epilepsy?
I was diagnosed in 1988 in my junior year in college.
Oh, okay.
So I've been living with this for 30 years. I kind of put two diagnosis dates on that. One is the date that I actually was told I had epilepsy. The other one is when my doctor finally got around to saying, okay, Matt, let's have a scan of your brain and see if we can figure out what exactly is going on.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, that's when I found out that there are a lot of anatomical things with my brain that are causing my epilepsy. So I don't remember a whole lot about the actual diagnosis. I remember waking up in the middle of the night. My girlfriend was putting my shoes on. She was putting my coat on. I remember going to the university hospital. I don't remember a whole lot of what happened there. It was, for one thing, it was traumatic. For another thing, epilepsy and the medications you take for it really have a very destructive effect on the brain, so on the memory. So I don't know much about it except that they could tell fairly quickly that I had epilepsy.
Okay. And what symptoms led you to seek medical care?
Well, as I say, the night before I had that first seizure, I was at a movie with my girlfriend, and we noticed my left arm just, twitching every few seconds, and it didn't feel abnormal. It didn't hurt. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary except that I couldn't stop it. So we just kind of looked at each other and said, okay, if this is still going on in the morning, I'll run on down to Student Health Services and see what they say.
Mm-hmm.
And, the next thing I remember, I guess I had been sleeping, but next thing I remember was that waking up and just feeling like I could barely move, having someone put my coat, my shoes on, and being moved out to the hospital, and then just letting them do whatever they did.
Okay. I guess I'm also curious. You said it was traumatic. Was it just that so much was going on and that you were having a seizure at the time?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that gets involved with a lot of seizures is that it disrupts your immediate memory. You don't necessarily remember what's happened. You don't know what's going on. I will sometimes recognize people, remember who they are, remember where I am, and sometimes not.
Okay.
I heard of epilepsy. I had never known anyone with it. I certainly didn't know how intense it was to deal with. And so for those 4 or 5 days in the hospital, I was just completely out of it. There was also the initial diagnosis. I remember the nurse coming into the hospital room and saying to me just sort of casually, "Oh yeah, the doctor thinks you might have a brain tumor, but she's not sure."
Oh, wow.
And then she walked out.
Wow.
Oh, I'm
Oh, my
so
goodness.
And
sorry.
then she walked out, and I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm 20 years old. I don't."
Oh, geez. Yeah, that's
Nobody should go through that.
No, I'm so sorry. Yeah, that's traumatic.
Yeah, so in a sense, I was kind of happy to be diagnosed with epilepsy
Sure.
rather than that. So I'm lucky too that I got my diagnosis so quickly. A lot of people do have to go through a lot of stuff because seizures aren't always as obvious as mine, and ruling out other possible causes isn't always as easy. So, some people do take months or years to come up with a diagnosis. I was lucky; I got mine in less than a week.
Oh yeah, that's great. I mean, it's not great, but that is good.
In the intro, Matt, Lita mentioned that you used to be a preschool teacher turned computer programmer. How has having epilepsy affected your ability to work or to even drive or engage in recreational activities? What kind of effect has that had upon you?
Well, as far as driving, that's an interesting one. If I had been very, very careful about noting down my seizures and looking at the various state regulations on driving and not driving with seizures, if I'd been very careful with that, I would probably have had maybe 12 months out of the past 30 years that I would have been able to drive.
Okay.
And as it is, there have been periods of a year or a year and a half that I've had to depend on public transit or coworkers or my wife to drive me. There's always the question, especially at work, of what do I tell my boss? What do I tell my coworkers? When do I tell them? When I was a preschool teacher, I had a seizure during a parent-teacher conference. I don't think the parents realized that I have epilepsy. So that had a very big effect on my work. Recently, it's been pretty quiet. I don't have seizures that often, and mostly it's just that every so often I have to take a day off for testing or to recover from a seizure. Other than that, life is pretty normal for a lot of people with epilepsy. Most of our lives are fairly.
Well, that's good.
Okay.
Are there any adaptations that can help you in your day-to-day life with epilepsy?
Yeah, so obviously I'm on medications. I have 3 medications that I'm taking. So I have one of these huge 4x7 weekly medication boxes.
Okay.
Every Saturday night I have to refill them. I have an app on my phone that I use to track the medication and any seizures or side effects. I have a box that I always carry with me anytime I step out the door, even like to get to the car to take out the trash. I have my my emergency medications with me just in case. And a lot of times it's just, very simple as listening to my wife, who's often much more sensible than I am about how seriously I need to take a particular seizure or an episode of epilepsy.
Mm-hmm.
So there are different levels of the seizures that you're having?
I wouldn't say different levels. One of the things that I've told people a lot is that there is no such thing as a light seizure.
Mm-hmm.
Any seizure can affect you. Most of mine are not very noticeable. I can be within a couple of feet of you, and if you don't know what to look for, you probably won't be able to tell I've had a seizure.
Gotcha.
But there are seizures that do physically affect me more than others. As I say, if I have one of these big convulsive seizures, it feels like you've run a 5K in 30 seconds.
Yeah, I've heard that it really it takes everything out of you, right?
It really does. It really does. And as I say, there is a period of time where I don't know where I am. I might recognize a face, but I don't know who it is. I have no idea what's going on, where I am, what's happened. For me, I recover pretty quickly. It usually takes me half an hour. For some other people, it can take as long as a day or two. It depends on your brain and how well it's coping.
Well, in Matt, you said that you take like a preventative medications as well as you have the emergency medications. Have you tried any monitoring devices to kind of give you a heads up of when a seizure might be coming?
That can vary depending on the kinds of seizures. I know there are devices that people can wear. I know like Empathica makes a seizure monitor watch. I know I think Apple has an app for the Apple Watch to do that. But if your seizures don't have a lot of physical involvement, it becomes much more difficult to see when something is going to occur.
Sure.
And even when I was in the hospital in an epilepsy monitoring unit, they were wondering if I might be a candidate for surgery. When I had the seizure, they looked at my EEG. They looked at the brainwave monitor, and they literally could not see anything before the seizure. It just came out of nowhere.
Okay.
So I want to interrupt here, and I apologize. But earlier you mentioned that somebody could be within a couple of feet of you and they wouldn't know you're having a seizure. Does your body sense something like that coming on prior to you having a seizure?
Not usually. Occasionally, like a few hours beforehand, I will get an ache in my arm. As I said, it's my left arm and my left side that usually get the most involvement. And occasionally, I will get this sort of mysterious muscle ache in my upper left arm. It'll just feel like somebody's punched me there. But mostly, mostly it'll just be that, I'm sitting there or walking along and all of a sudden, bang, I'll get like paralysis in my arm and my face. It will be difficult or impossible to talk. I get this weird sort of falling or lightheaded sensation. Okay. And after about 5 or 10 seconds, that'll be it.
Right.
And if you're not watching me in the 5 or 10 seconds, if you are watching me in the 5 or 10 seconds, you might notice, my face go very hard set, and you might notice me sort of staring off into the distance.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're just next to me, you're not going to see that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I'm not going to know about it to tell you beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you. What kind of treatments are there available for epilepsy besides medication?
About 50%, I'd say, according to the material I've seen. The CDC has a big section on their website about epilepsy. About 50% of people do get their medication controlled do get their seizures get controlled by medication. Mostly only one medication works for most people. If that doesn't work, about 10% of people can be helped by surgery, either directly by locating where the seizures originate and just removing it, or by getting an implant that can detect seizure activity and interfere with it before it starts spreading and causing a problem. There are also a few people a fair number of people that can be helped by diet. I mean, one of the big things that has been popular in as far as dieting in the last few years in general has been the keto diet.
Mm-hmm.
That was originally developed 100 years or so ago specifically to help children with a couple of intractable types of epilepsy. If their seizures couldn't be controlled by medication, they discovered that putting them on this particular diet reduced their number of seizures.
Oh.
And so that is what the keto diet was originally designed for. It's
Wow.
a seizure reduction. It's a seizure reduction approach.
Never knew that.
Yeah.
That's the high fat, right? Low carb, right?
Exactly. What people originally noticed was that if people known to have seizures became malnourished or fasted for a long time or were starving, their seizures slowed down or stopped altogether. So what they decided to do was lower the amount of carbs that you take in drastically to try and trick your body into thinking that it is starving. Because for some reason, then what happens if you really lower the carbs and raise the fat, your body starts burning the fat. And for some reason, the jury's still out. For some reason, it changes brain chemistry so that seizures are less likely to happen. And there are a couple of types of pediatric epilepsy, especially, that are very severe, very resistant to medication. And this is a really common method of dealing with those kinds of seizures.
Matt, does anyone else you said you had heard of epilepsy before you were diagnosed, but does anyone else in your family have epilepsy? Is there a genetic component?
There can be a genetic component to epilepsy. Again, it depends on the type of epilepsy you have. There are some epilepsies that are inherited. The feeling is that mine is genetic, but it is a mutation, just something that happens. I do have a nephew who was diagnosed about a year and a half ago with epilepsy. His looks like mine, but the causation, the mechanism of it is actually completely different.
Okay.
So there can be a genetic inherited component, but apparently not in my particular case.
Well, and at least he has Uncle Matt to look up to as
Be a pathfinder or something.
Yep.
So, Matt, I actually had a follow-up question because I was going to ask you if there were anything that made your symptoms better or worse, and one of them was going to be diet, which you already addressed. But besides that, is there anything else that seems to affect either positively or negatively the epilepsy?
Yeah. Well, I think everybody has seizure triggers. I think one thing that people don't realize is that literally anybody can have a seizure. for any person, there's always a level of
like seizure
going
potential
on in your brain.
Yeah.
There's always what they call a seizure threshold. And, if you get activity or something pushing your brain beyond that limit, people can have seizures. The CDC says 1 in 10 people will have a seizure in their lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And almost 40% of those will be diagnosed with epilepsy. So there are seizure triggers that can affect anybody. For me, stress, especially at work,
Mm-hmm.
And sleep. One of the really important things. I'm literally, I'm not prescribed any sleep aids, but my doctor is very insistent. My doctor is asking me, am I always in bed with the lights out by 10 o'clock?
Mm-hmm.
I have to have that amount of sleep. I have to have things that will help me control stress, improving things. As long as I reasonably take care of my physical health, I will minimize the number of seizures I have. I'm one of the 30% or so of people whose seizures cannot be totally controlled, but I can minimize them by just looking after myself in general.
Right. Are you a member of any online support groups, or are there any sites that you go to for just general information, or to kind of see what other people have been experiencing?
Sure. Well, there are a lot of places to go. Facebook, of course, is full of places. I am in a couple of Facebook support groups. A lot of times there, I feel more because my epilepsy doesn't affect me very heavily very often. I'm usually there more in a supporter
Mm-hmm.
position than a position of needing support.
Okay.
There are plenty of information sites, like the Epilepsy Foundation of America has their website, epilepsy.com, that has discussion forums available. There is a whole social media website, myepilepsyteam.com, that is specifically only for people with epilepsy. And I've gotten a lot of help and support there too.
Great.
Yeah, and you had actually said also that you use like an app.
Yeah.
Does that track your triggers, and can you input your sleep patterns and other information into that as well?
Yeah, well, I track my medications.
Okay.
I'll track my seizures and note down when they happened, how long, what kind of things might have been as triggers. It will also help me manage the side effects from my medications. And of course,
okay.
since these are pretty powerful medications that work directly on the brain, so there are often lots of very annoying side effects. So I'll be able to track those, to correlate them with when I've had seizures and with my moods and so on. There are a lot of those out there. I have a really, really helpful one for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely, it's very useful. I definitely need it to help me keep track of things, especially because my memory is not going to hold them.
Okay.
It's just not.
What would you say, Matt, is the biggest challenge for you living with epilepsy?
Oh, that's a hard one. I would probably say the unpredictability of it.
Okay.
I do have intractable epilepsy, which means no matter what medication I take, no matter how good care I take of myself, I will have a seizure
Mm-hmm.
at some point. It could be 5 minutes from now, it could be 5 months from now. I don't know when it'll happen. I don't know where it will be or what I'll be doing. I don't know how much of an effect it's going to have on me. And that kind of uncertainty and unpredictability will be always in the back of my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's why I have to carry my meds and everything with me, just in case. And that puts some stress on me, which in turn can make it more likely that I have a seizure. But I think that's the really big thing. Just knowing that I have this and that it's going to affect me at some unknown time in some unknown way.
Okay. Does that help you live like in the now more?
I would say so, definitely. There have been times when I start counting. In a couple of days from now, I will be a month seizure free, and there are times when I say to myself, "Oh, I'm going to be 6 months seizure. If I can make it through the next 2 weeks, I'll be 6 months seizure free, and then I'll start counting down 13, 12, 11 days."
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the longer I do that, the more stress that puts on me.
Sure.
So what I've learned to do is just sort of say to myself, "Oh yeah, I'm just look at the calendar. Oh yeah, cool, it's coming up on a month," and then just sort of drop it and not think about it anymore.
Okay.
It's always there.
Mm-hmm.
It's always there, but it doesn't always have to bother me.
Sure. That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah, I like that.
Matt, I wanted to ask you this question, and I, apologize if it seems really intrusive, but
No problem.
Are you eligible, or people that have epilepsy, are you eligible for service animals in case, like you say, something comes on? Are you eligible to have a service animal with you?
Yes, there are a couple of there are several places in the U.S. that will train service dogs, and there are a couple of kinds of service dogs. Some of them are actually able, in many cases, to sense, we guess, to smell a seizure coming on. Some of them, you can't necessarily predict which animals will be able to do that, but there are some that will, accompany someone with a seizure and are trained to go get help, to ask people, to get people's attention, to come back for help, to try and make sure that they can get you to a safe place before you actually have the seizure.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, there are. My dad. That was one of the first things my dad did when he found out that I had a seizure. He went to see if there was someone that I could be around, a service dog.
So do you currently use one, or is that something that wouldn't work for you, or?
Oh, in my case, as I say, I have, right now, I typically have, let's say, between 4 and 10 seizures a year.
Okay.
So honestly, the expense of getting one and taking care of, I would love to have. I love pets, but this is not a pet.
Right. Absolutely.
But it would be a companion. But honestly, for me, it wouldn't be worth it.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
So since the beginning, you started out our conversation where you had a girlfriend in college, and now I've heard through our conversation that you have a wife. So have you gotten assistance from your family and friends as you've been dealing with this illness?
Well, I have an awesome family. They have been so supportive. I have heard horror stories about people who have been completely rejected from their families and from their circle of friends. That has not happened to me at all. I've been very, very lucky in that. Mom was also a teacher. My dad was in the medical profession, so they are familiar with that. And for my family, a lot of them have just grown up with me, having this. So it's been part of my life. I work for a medical practice, so people are comfortable with that.
Okay.
It's been really, it's been a great thing for me to have the kind of support that people are willing to give me here.
That's great. And I'm sorry to hear that you've heard, I guess, through the social media sites that there are people that don't have that kind of support. That's a shame. And I'm sure that you've reached out to them and have offered your support.
Sure.
In this.
There are people whose family, whose parents do not accept them. They will say, "Oh, you're being lazy. You're pretending. You don't really have a condition." And I have to, and people will start saying to themselves, then they'll start half believing that. Mm-hmm. And I will be able to step in and say, you know what? I've sometimes felt, simply because my epilepsy doesn't affect me that often, I've sometimes felt that I haven't had epilepsy, but you know what? I do. You do. This is as serious as you think it is. And just because your family does not agree with you does not mean that you are not affected seriously, that this is not a big issue for you. So yeah, I do spend a lot of time being there for other people.
Well, that's good.
That's great.
Yeah, it sounds like the family needs a lot of education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, possibly.
So yeah, especially not everybody has heard of this. A lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about it.
Sure.
And it can be really scary to see someone have a seizure.
Mm-hmm.
One of the cool things about my wife was that when we were still dating, she saw me have a seizure. We actually, we had been driving, we had been looking for, I just moved up to be in my new apartment there, and we were looking for furniture. We pulled into the parking lot of the furniture store, and literally before I had a chance to get my seatbelt off, I was having a seizure. And she was sitting right there next to me, and she was like, okay, no problem, you're having a seizure. Let me get your seatbelt off. Let me call 911. She was awesome.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, what's the best piece of advice that you've heard along this journey that you've had?
I'm trying to think of this. A lot of my journey with epilepsy has kind of been on my own. Within 5 years of having my diagnosis with epilepsy, I moved to my first real job. I moved from St. Louis out to the Seattle area, where I knew nobody, had no family, no friends, and a lot of seizures. So a lot of this journey has been very much on my own. But I think the best advice that I've had has been completely out of the context of epilepsy at all. The best advice that I've got has come from Dory in Finding Nemo.
I was going to say,
I'm interested in hearing this.
Keep swimming.
Just keep swimming. Because you know what? I know this is going to affect me. It's going to happen. But I can't let it control me. I can't just sit there and let it attack me. I have to keep on going and do what I do.
That's great advice.
Good advice.
Thank you, Dory. Thank you. Is it Pixar?
Absolutely.
Yep.
The other thing is that I see that, and I realize that there are people who have more problems with memory than I do, and that's a little reassuring to me.
Yeah, the brain is a very complex, piece of anatomy, and yeah,
it's our computer.
It is our computer, and sometimes we need a backup device.
Sometimes we need to reboot.
Yep.
Unplug it. Plug it in.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Have you tried turning it off and turning it on again? I would prefer not to turn my brain off.
Well, I guess that's what you're doing when you're sleeping at night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Matt, what do you wish others knew, or what tips or advice would you have for someone who is recently diagnosed with epilepsy? And I'm also curious, what response should people have if someone is having a seizure?
Okay, so let's do that one thing at a time here. As far as if someone is having a seizure, probably the most obvious seizures you'll see are these generalized tonic-clonic seizures, where somebody falls down, mm-hmm. they lose consciousness, they're mm-hmm. convulsing. First thing you do, if you don't know that they have epilepsy, if you can possibly manage it, check their wrist or their neck for medical ID.
Sure.
If you can manage it in the middle of their convulsing and you see they have epilepsy, start timing the seizure. Well, start timing the seizure anyway, because if you have epilepsy, a seizure is not a medical emergency unless it goes on for longer than 5 minutes. Unless, obviously you're injured or something like that. Mm-hmm. If you don't know and you can't see that they have epilepsy, you call 911 right away. Other than that, put something soft under their head. Just make sure there's nothing around that they can slam into and hurt themselves on. Whatever you do, do not, and this has been something people have mistaken ideas about, do not put anything in your mouth, in their mouth.
Absolutely.
Unless you want them to choke, mm-hmm. or you want them to bite your finger off. And mm-hmm. literally, we can bite your finger off mm-hmm. if you do that. So, other than that, keep calm as they wake up. Just be calm around them. Let them know what happened, and just try to support them and help them deal with the waking up and figuring out what's going on.
What about trying to roll people on their side a little bit?
Obviously that's not going to work while they're convulsing. But yes, after they have the seizure, you want to put them in a recovery position. You want to lift up their right knee and gently roll them over onto their left side. The reason you do that is that sometimes people vomit mm-hmm. after having a seizure just because of the exertion, and you do not want them to breathe that in, to aspirate any of that, because it can give them pneumonia. Mm-hmm. Yeah, do try and gently roll them to their side.
After the seizure stops.
Thanks for mentioning that, Ron. I almost forgot that.
No. We're trying to educate our listeners. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. As far as what other people should know and what I tell other people with epilepsy, I wish other people knew how common epilepsy was. There are as many people in the U.S. with epilepsy as there are breast cancer patients and survivors. There are almost 3.5 million of us. It's a lot more common than people think. I wish they knew how serious epilepsy can be. You can die mm-hmm. from mm-hmm. having seizures, or just from having epilepsy even without seizures. I wish they would know that it is not contagious. Mm-hmm. It is not demonic possession.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
It's not. Oh yeah, there are still people who think that even in the U.S.
Oh, that's sad.
And it is not something that would just go away if only you did X, Y, Z.
Mm-hmm. And that's where the education comes in.
Right.
That's exactly where the education comes in, because when people are ignorant of the fact, they assume the worst.
Or they hold on to the last thing that they heard, which is a rumor, and they might get their finger bit off or worse.
Yeah. There is a young lady I know of who mentioned, I think, to somebody that she met that she had epilepsy, And the man literally said, you can stop having seizures if you just walk around with a metal spoon in your pocket.
Oh, wow.
And everybody was just like, what?
Wow.
Where did that come from? So yeah, I wish people would know that, this is something that happens to us. It's not something that we can wish away or just magic away. And I wish they would know that it's also not something that can keep us from having very much a normal life,
right?
Living a life that's a lot like theirs.
Mm-hmm.
It really isn't. As far as what I would tell somebody with epilepsy, I think the biggest, the core of my approach, this is something I try and write into my blog. The core of my approach is that with epilepsy, you're going to get upset, you're going to get angry, you're going to get depressed. All of these things are good. They're helpful. Don't be ashamed of them. Don't try and get away from them. At the same time, at some point, you're going to have to say to yourself, whatever happened before is different. This is now part of my life, and I can let it control me, or I can figure out what I'm going to do to help me grow, how I'm going to use it to help me become who I really can be. That's the tagline for my blog. It's yours, own or be owned.
Yeah, no, that's a great attitude to have, which actually leads me into my next question. Do you have any social media other than the blog, or how can our listeners find out more about you?
Sure. Well, the blog, epilepsyempowered.org.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Sorry, say that again?
Could you repeat that, please?
Yeah, it's epilepsyempowered.org. And I have the email address through there. You can email me at matt@epilepsyempowered.org. There is also a Twitter account at epilepsyemp. They wouldn't let me fit the whole empowered in, so at epilepsyemp. And yeah, I'm totally open. Email me, DM me on Twitter, hit me up, reach out to me. I am not a medical professional. I will not diagnose you. I will not tell you what you should and shouldn't do. I will not tell you what's going on, but I will be glad to tell you anything that I have learned, that I've seen, anything that I've experienced, or just to talk if you need someone to talk through this with. I'm there. I will be there for you.
That's great. That's wonderful to hear, Matt. We really do appreciate you sharing your story with us this morning.
Yeah, and thank you so much for your advocacy. I know we learned more about you through We Go Health, and we just, we need more people like you out there lending your support.
Leading the way.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thanks. I mean, I really appreciate getting the time and getting the opportunity to talk with people. It's really important, especially for conditions that are as relatively unknown and as stigmatized as epilepsy, to just get news out there. And I'm really glad to have come across you guys and your podcast and been able to take the opportunity to do some education.
Right, and that's exactly what I was going to say. Throughout the conversation this morning, and sharing or hearing, I should say, of some of the horror stories that you were mentioning, what you've been explaining all morning has been very educational, and I really wish that some of the things that you talked about earlier, I wish those people could hear you talk now.
Yes.
Well, it's amazing how much more accepting people can be if they just know simple, basic truths.
Exactly.
Yeah, a little knowledge can go a long
Right.
way.
So if our listeners have any questions or comments related to today's show, they can contact us at PodcastDX@yahoo.com, through our website, PodcastDX.com, on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and even Instagram.
And if you have a moment to spare, please leave us a review wherever you get your podcast. As always, please keep in mind that this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment before undertaking a new healthcare regime. And never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this podcast.
Till next week.